In this video, we're going to continue work on this simple table. To do that, I'm going to start by creating another cube. This cube I'm going to use for the leg. Now I'm going to do a little bit of shaping on it, but not a lot right now. But the first thing I need to do is make sure that the cube lines up with what I'm using for the floor, which is the grid. So I can grab that bottom face, and I want to snap that up to the grid. So once again, I can either do that by turning on the grid here, or turning on snap to grid here and pulling it up, or by holding down the X key once it's turned off, and then using that to snap to grid. In order to use some of the tools that you've already learned, in particular using the Extrud tool, we're going to use that to help create a leg shape. So it's not going to be anything fancy. I'm simply going to do an extrusion in, do an extrusion up, another extrusion, and then I'll extrude this last piece up. Now I want to make sure that that lines up with the bottom of the table. So in order to do that, I want to use snap to point. Once again, I can either turn it on up here, or I can hold down the V key and snap to point. So while holding down on the left mouse button, I need to highlight on which point I am snapping to in that direction. So while I'm holding down on it, you see when I go up, it snaps to the top. When I go down, it snaps down. So I let go here so it snaps to the bottom of the table. And then as a final move, I am going to hit backspace to delete that face. The reason for this, if I pull this out, you will see. The reason for this is because we are never going to see that that face is not there. This lines up with the bottom of the table. If there was a circumstance where the leg would get broken off somehow, and I would need to have that geometry there, then yes, I would leave it. But in this case, this is going to be a solid table. I'm never going to see the top of that leg, and so that can be deleted. So I'll step back and move it into place. Now I have this leg. And if you notice, I modeled it at the origin at right angles. I've got the pivot down here at the origin to help me with moving this. And by the way, if this table is never going to be turned on its side or upside down or anything, I could also potentially move that bottom face. Because I'm not sure if it would be, I will leave that on for now. And this is where I can switch to other view modes. So hitting the spacebar key, I go into this 4 view mode. Once again, if you're having trouble finding it, it's over here on the left side, the 4 view mode. And then I can use the space bar to move in and out of the different views. And if you're not sure which one they are, this gives me the top Y, front Z, side X. So this is top, front, side. And I'm actually going to come into the top view. And if I switch to wireframe mode, this is where I can use the grid to help me move this object. So if I hold down the X key, I can snap it over here to this corner to get it into place. I want everything to be symmetrical for this table, and so I want to use the tools that I have available. If I need to change something, like let's say I don't have enough spots on the grid, I don't have enough grid lines, the way I can adjust that is by coming up here to Display, Grid, and I can turn it off or back on. And if I come over to the option box, I can then adjust how many grid lines there are. So I can do a grid line every unit, and I can do 2 subdivisions and hit apply. And you see that increased the number of subdivisions. So I actually like that a little bit better. So while I have the X key held down for snap to grid, I will bring that up right here to this corner. And then I will duplicate this object. And by the way, if you want to change the grid back at any time, come back here, switch that back down, hit apply, which I don't, but figured I would at least show you. So hit apply again, so that's got twice the number of lines. And now in order to create these other legs, I want to duplicate this object. I don't have to rebuild each leg uniquely, I just want to duplicate the one I already have. So in order to do this, I am going to hit Control D, or I can come up to Edit Duplicate. And if you notice, when I come to Edit Duplicate, here it shows the hotkey Control D. So I select the object, Control D, and now I can move this out. And in order to make sure it lines up, I hold down the X key and I snap to grid so that everything is symmetrical. To create the legs on the other side, I want to shift left click to select both of them, hit Control D again to duplicate, and I can drag them out and snap down. If you notice when I snap, I'm grabbing the arrow, because if I grab just right here in the center and snap to grid, they actually go right on top of each other. So it's important that I use those arrows so I'm only moving along a single axis. So holding X, I snap that down and bring it to the edge. And now I have 4 legs and the tabletop. To make sure that things are going to be clean, I want to make sure that that is all in my scene. If I accidentally hit duplicate a few times, there's actually going to be some problems created. For example, right now it looks like I only have these 5 objects. This is where the outliner comes into play. If I go Window, Outliner, before I combine these, I can count and go, hey, there's more than just 5 of these. And this is where I may need to select them one at a time to figure out where I've duplicated. So there's the first one, there's the second one, third one, fourth one, fifth one, and the extra legs are right here. So I want to select 6 through 9. I held Shift and clicked, and then hit backspace to remove them so that I only have the 5 shapes that I'm going to be combining. I can then left click and drag to marquee select all 5. And in order to make these a single object, because I don't want to have these separate, I don't want this to be 5 different objects, I want this to be one table. I I marquee select by holding down the left mouse key and dragging, marquee select all 5 of those, or if you want to shift select, you can come to the outliner and just select one, shift, left click the other to select them. And then I go up to Mesh Combine. And this turns them into a single object. Now it moved the pivot to the center of the mesh. As it calculated it from all the vertices that are there, it moved it into the center. In order to make sure that this is where it needs to be, once again, I will select D, and holding down the X key now, I will snap to grid and bring that pivot to the origin. And then I will click on D again. And now I have this table created, and it has its pivot at the origin. I'm going to open up the attribute editor, and you'll notice I still have all this history. Before I delete that, I want to open up the outliner one more time to show you something. Under the outliner, you're seeing these 5 shapes which represent the old pieces. This is part of the history. This is also what empty nodes look like. So after you delete the history and do cleanup, if these are still around, in many cases that's information, historical information from the object that have not been removed as part of the process. This can happen a lot when you get complex objects that have multiple pieces combined, or even when your modeling just gets very complex over a long period of time if you're not deleting the history and cleaning up as you go. And so before I delete these, because right now these are holding some of the history, and if I delete them, it could actually break the object. What I want to do is select the object and do the delete history first. So edit, delete by type, or delete all by type. And delete all by type is for the entire object, or for everything in the scene. For delete by type, it is only objects that are selected. So by habit, I usually do delete all by type history. And you notice that cleared off these tabs as well as clearing out this information right here in the outliner. Now, with that information right there all cleared out, I'm going to go in and make sure I name the object. And by the way, the other reason why we name this transform, in addition to it automatically naming the mesh, is that that's the name that we see over here, the pCube6. So if I call this table 1 mesh, you see that it updates here, it updates there, and so naming it is very important. I've deleted the history, I've named the object. I also want to freeze the transforms. It's already frozen, but by habit I will just show you again, modify, freeze transforms. So if there had been a scale change, for example, if I had finished the object and gone, well, that's okay, but I need to be just a little bit larger. All right, now I can come here, edit, delete all by type history, modify, freeze transforms, just to make sure everything's clean and that it says, hey, this is the default state for this object. Once again, the initial shading group in Lambert I'm leaving on for now, but keep in mind as you progress to creating your own materials and textures, that will also be cleaned out. So I will save this object, File, Save Scene As, Table 1, or Table _ 1. I will save that. And a final note that I want to make is this right here. Many of you may be already having troubles seeing your handles. For example, you may have it something like this where it's either really tiny or where the handles are off screen. This happens when you hit the plus or minus key. So if you start seeing this issue, or you just need to adjust the handles to get a better view so that they're easier to grab, you simply hit the plus or the minus key to get them to a shape that works for you on your screen.